is a class divide on the left right now where you have privileged motherfuckers with health care who get mad at poor and disenfranchised people for not liking the politicians that they like. So why is this accepted on the left? People wondering why I'm going off on the Western left. This is why. This is why. There is no solidarity in this movement. So these privileged people, they see people get left behind. So if you don't support Medicare for all, how many people are going to die because of that? If you are not canceling student loan debt, how many people are living in poverty because of your decision? But meanwhile, privileged people, and I've seen their houses, it's not fair that I've seen it, but I've seen it. The people we talking about, they make a lot of money. The people make a lot of money, and then they get mad at protesters for challenging their favorite politicians. And yes, I am mad because I see people going along with it. I thought the left, I thought we were supposed to have class analysis. But apparently we don't. So when I get mad at the squad for funding the police more, how are you going to get mad at me for criticizing your favorite politicians when they are funding the forces of oppression that are killing us? You know why? Because you're a white privileged motherfucker who's staying at home knowing that you're not going to be a victim of police violence. So since you know you're not going to be a victim of police violence, you get mad at people who are calling out your favorite politicians for being complicit with it. No, we are not allies. No, we are not friends unless you stand in our community. And I'm calling all these people out because I am tired of people putting the preference and the opinions and the emotional health of the politicians over the activists.
Amen.
So,
amen, Nick. Amen.
Where I come from, so I'm going to get to the question. But where I come from, we shouldn't even give them a fucking excuse like, oh, technically Rome wasn't the one who did. I don't care. My response to that was, are you telling me that working class people should not challenge your favorite politicians? You made the argument why we shouldn't be mad at Bernie. You made the argument why we should be mad at AOC. Instead of be like, oh my God, these activists, they're so toxic because they mad at your favorite politician. Fuck you.
And welcome to, this isn't the first episode for those who are just catching this series here. I actually did an episode on Saturday called What is Imperialism? But welcome to I Am Revolution, a brand new podcast on the RBN network. We're streaming all this week. I know it says that in a little scrolling bar, but just looking at all the things we have to cover, it's probably going to be 2 or 3 weeks because I'm thinking imperialism I did on Saturday. Then we do socialism. We got to do feudalism. We got to do communism. We got to do capitalism. We got to do Black radical tradition. We got to do, Fred Hampton. We got to do Karl Marx. We got to do, it's a lot of people that we need to cover, and just understanding ideology for the proletariat. So that is very important. Education is very important. And I thought this was a great video to start out with because Nick is talking about a class divide in that video. And on the left, but of course, Marx is talking about class divide, everybody, not just the left, but specifically Nick was talking about the left. Other thing is, welcome everybody on Rockfin. Hit the like button hit the like button so that more people are able to see this content. What we're tackling today, which is what is socialism. Everybody wants to talk about it on the left. Everybody says I'm a socialist. So if you're a socialist, hit the like button. If you're here to learn about socialism, hit the like button. If you're here and a breathing human, hit the like button so that more people are able to see this. This is really the only way we're able to fight against the algorithms. So please do that. Hit the like button. Also subscribe. Our subscriber count is now above 15,100. Thank you for that. It was something I was just Substack. That's what I wanted to get to. So underneath you see the scrolling bar. We have a Substack. It's just simply revolutionaryblackout.substack.com. Go there, join our mailing list. You'll get updates. You'll get notifications when content is coming out. you like directly to your email, where you can watch it from your email. You can click on it and watch it from your email. So this is a very convenient option that we're doing through Substack. We're also going to be doing some writings on Substack. So it's not just podcasts. We're going to be doing both. But we need, I mean, these streams get a good amount of people. So, you know, however many people are watching now, please go to that Substack. Actually, I'm going to pin it. I'm going to put it in the comments, and I'll pin the comment so that you can just click on the link. Let me actually get that before. Actually, no. Let's get started with the education. So, what the purpose of this series is to, I want to compile a series of streams where people are able to watch consecutively, or in a group. It doesn't have to be necessarily consecutively, to get an understanding. Like if it's revolution time, like the physical part of it. Right now, we're in the educational part of it. We need these people to be educated on community, which communism, social. That's all kind of tied together. So this is very important. So we do all the sort of controversial, scandalous stuff. You know, this person said that, Jimmy Dore said this, Sam Cedar, TYT, and then everybody's eyes are here. But now when it's time for education, we need the same sort of interest. So I just want to make that clear. Let's not turn off our attention when it's time for the classroom. Okay? So if we're truly trying to be revolutionary, this is about learning this information. And like I said, I like to teach, or I like to have discussions from the basic level, where you're defining everything before you just dive off into stuff, and assuming that a person already knows these things. So we were going to start with the socialist video or content video first, but I felt like, because he's mentioned so often, we kind of have to talk about who Karl Marx was, but just briefly, like literally a minute or two, just so people have a baseline of who this person is that we keep referring to. So that is another point. Let me do a chat check here. Hang on a second here. So we're gonna do a chat check here. Let's make sure everything is looking good in the chat area. Oh, you are in the house, sir. It's weird to talk to you and see you on the screen paused, Nick. But I think, Nick, you can appreciate the point that I'm making, because you always say you're the nerd, and I think you know the most on different topics than anybody in this organization, and I'm trying to catch up to that, especially in foreign policy. But we have to educate before we're able to understand what a revolution is. Oh, that's another thing we're going to do a stream on. What is revolution? That's another thing. So there's a lot in this series. Hopefully, maybe some other RBN members can join, one of these days, or for one of the contents that they're really passionate on. And I'm not, I should have took Nick off so that it doesn't seem like I'm calling him out. But he did give me the idea. CJ, are there degrees of socialism that are acceptable in which we are able to realign institutions, policies, while moving away from the corporate capitalist economy and empire we live in the U.S.? That is a great question that's actually addressed in this stream. There is degrees of socialism. So let's start there. So let me actually bring up something here for us all to watch, or not watch, so you can see kind of like what I'm going to be covering here. I will share the screen as soon as I have it up. All right, now I believe I clicked the wrong thing. All right, media, and here we go. All right, so I'll take this video down. Shout out to Nick. donating his content to the stream. And what was I just about to show you? I think it was this one. Yeah. All right. So just to get a clear understanding of what we're going to be covering mostly here, there is some overlapping. Listen, when you're defining socialism and you're talking about it, the real socialism, there's no way of really talking about it where you're not overlapping with communism, and there's some communism, and you have to talk about Lenin. It's a lot of things that I'm trying to condense. So there's a lot of layers, but the first thing is to understand there is different interpretations of socialism. How it's expressed is a better way. How socialism is expressed is different ways that people have done it. So what is socialism? What is socialism? Orthodox socialism is what we're going to be mainly talking about today. Because I felt like we needed to start from the root. We have to start from the beginning, the genesis. And when the word communism and socialism meant the same thing, because a lot of people don't know this, but communism and socialism used to be interchangeable. It was around, I think Lenin was the one where it made it separate. It was, communism, lower level communism, higher level, or communism 1, communism 2. And then communism 1 is given a name socialism. So we'll cover that too. We'll cover also the proletariat dictatorship, what is meant by that, in some of the writings or the concepts that Marx has about this, and then the process of going from capitalism to communism, which socialism is kind of the middle bridge and where we land for this episode. So that was a lot, but we are going to address that question today. Let's see. We're not there yet. I'm trying to start at the basic level, but yes, I'm trying to start at the basic level for everybody to. Okay, Nick, right on. I don't know. We'll talk about it tonight when we do our show. Which one we're going to do next? Whether it's feudalism, black radicals. There's no order that I'm doing this in, because so much of it overlaps anyway. So. All right, it looks like I'm gonna have to turn the air on too because I'm starting to get hot out here. Oh, and the reason I'm out here, I'm in my living area instead of my bedroom. Wife will be leaving soon. Typically works in home, but today she has to go out. So that means I'm here alone with our youngest, who happens to also have a cold. So I'm here so that she's gonna be right here playing, watching, her TV. So just let you know, she might see her walking by or something in the background. So just a heads up. I know there's somebody here walking, so no worries. All right, so let's get into the first video that kind of describes Karl Marx in a very in a brief way, and that's the reason why I'm selected this video to use, because it's a very concise description, to the point, so that we can move on to what is capitalism. And let me we can play the whole thing so that you get the whole feel of it. It's like maybe a minute and a half, I think, maybe less than that.
Workers of the world, assemble. It's time for the ruling classes to tremble. I'm the people's hero, the MVP, MARX. Yeah, you know me.
So Karl Marx is a German philosopher and economist. He lives from 1818 to 1883. Spent most of his youth in Germany, where he studied almost on the trajectory to become a university professor, but he was also a political radical, so he was always fleeing governments that were trying to chase off threats to their own system of power. So he migrates across Europe and eventually settles in London, England, which is kind of his point of refuge, and it's also where he does most of his writing.
I wonder why London is a lot of where, because I know in the Renaissance, there's a lot of travel to London. I wonder why that is during that time. So, or not during that time, but I wonder why that is. So, but let's continue with the brief description of Karl Marx.
writing. So across his career, he's primarily a pamphleteer interested in the condition of the working man. So he's a labor radical that's trying to devise a system of political thought to basically better the condition of the working man. And this leads him to becoming a founding figure in the modern communist movement. Partners up with Friedrich Engels, who's a fellow radical revolutionary from Germany that also migrates to England. Engels basically becomes his patron. He's from a wealthier family that has a manufacturing.
Now, that was a part about Engels I didn't know. That he was like the financier, like the person that's footing a lot of the funding for what they're doing. So that's something that was new to me. So let's continue.
Factory in Manchester. So he's able to use that as kind of a subsidy for Marx as the intellectual driver. And then over the course of his career, he produces several major works of labor theory, anti-capitalist theory, basic theory of socialism. So the two best known are the Communist Manifesto, which is in 1848. It's a co-authored work with Engels that basically tries to lay out a groundwork.
And what I have to say about the Communist Manifesto and capitalism is that if capitalism really felt like they were the best system, they would be teaching. The Communist Manifesto will be a class in all business, because they will be saying, let's look at this, the most widely known critique and detailed critique of capitalism, this person, these people. Let's teach that and completely obliterate it by all the great conditions of capitalism. That's what you would do if you really felt that, instead of just making up lies, smearing it. Because if people knew the truth about some of these other systems, they would understand how terrible capitalism is. So just wanted to make that point. Let's continue. I think there's a few more. It's more than a minute and 30 seconds. Maybe it's 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
For executing a revolutionary socialist ascendant. And then his more academic-y intellectual work is Capital, or Das Kapital, which is published in German in 1867. And this becomes more of the theoretical framework for the Marxist system.
So he said, look, there's problems. There's the Industrial Revolution. Look at all these factories. It's awful.
Stop it. There we go. We'll stop it there. As far as talking about Karl Marx, let me make sure. Okay. So as far as talking about Karl Marx, so you get a rough understanding of who he is, when he was born, roughly, because we're going to do a stream dedicated just to him, where we're going to go on more detailed sort of a biography of him. But that's not for this stream, but we still needed to kind of give a brief description for those who are unfamiliar with it, because we want to start from the basics and not assume anybody already knows anything. So let's now go into the main video by this teacher. Does a great job of explaining it, because he explains it very well. Revolution and Ideology is the name of, can you see that there? Revolution and Ideology is the name. Have some great video on there. Check it out if you get a chance. If you just want to, if you want to watch the full version of this, because all we're gonna be talking about a short segment where he's explicitly just talking about the system of capitalism, because the video he kind of has to address history and all, just to give you a foundation for the conversation. And that's not what we're doing today. So let's begin with the video content. I'll be stopping and starting and speaking different points.
Without exploitation, capitalism would cease to exist. But like I said, this isn't a moral argument. This is an economic argument from Marx's standpoint. He's not making an ethical or a moral argument. He's saying that economically, capitalism cannot exist without exploitation. And that's the fundamental critique that Marx has of capitalism. Okay, so let's get into what is socialism then, and how do we get from capitalism to socialism? Well, according to Friedrich Engels, He says socialism, he says communism, actually. Remember, they use these terms interchangeably. Communism is the doctrine of the conditions of the liberation of the proletariat.
I'm going to rewind that. I love that. Communism, and just keep that in mind. Some of these writings, and I will try to make sure I preface before I talk about it to make sure you understand that communism and socialism is, at this point in his writings, is used interchangeably. So whether he's saying communism or socialism, using those words, it's not today's definition. They're interchangeable. So, but I love this. Communism is the doctrine of the conditions of the liberation of the proletariat. Absolutely. Let's continue with the video.
Conditions of the liberation of the proletariat. Okay, thanks, Engels, but that doesn't actually help us to understand anything really, though I think people would definitely be impressed if they asked you what socialism was, and you said that socialism is the doctrine of the conditions of the liberation of the proletariat. That would probably impress a few people.
Wrong
but
button.
I think you better be ready with some more definitions and an idea what that concept is, because questions are going to follow. So let's continue. Engels says, above all, it will have to take control of industry and of all branches of production out of the hands of mutually competing individuals, and instead institute a system in which all these branches of production are operated by society as a whole. That is for the common account, according to a common plan, and with the participation of all members of society.
Let's stop there, and I'm going to reread it. Okay, so what is socialism, communism, according to Marx and Engels? Communism is the doctrine of the condition of the liberation of the proletariat. And then, because there's not a socialism is this. There's just concepts. There's just, so let's just read this here. So above all, it will have to take the control of industry and of all branches of production out of the hands of mutually competing individuals, and instead institute a system in which all these branches of production are operated by society as a whole. That is, for the common account, according to a common plan, with the participation of all members of society. So that's above all what socialism is, like Orthodox socialism. So let's continue with the video.
Private property must therefore be abolished, and in its place must come the common utilization of all.
Let's start that over. So I said that's what sums it up, and I forgot to. This is the second part. That sums up the first part of the definition. That's what I should have said.
An account according to a common plan and with the participation of all members of society. Private property must therefore be abolished, and in its place must come the common utilization of all instruments of production and the distribution of all products according to common agreement. In a word, what is called communal ownership of goods. He continues, in fact, the abolition of private property is doubtless the shortest and most significant way to characterize the revolution. Okay, so let's sum that quote up, and we can come up with basically two main tenets of Orthodox socialism. The first one is that the workers must have control over the workplace. The second one is private property will be abolished. I think the second one is where people have the biggest sort of misconceptions about socialism. So let's talk about private property and the concept of private property. Here, Marx specifically is highly influenced by Proudhon, which is an anarchist thinker, a French anarchist thinker about the same time period. And he writes a work in which he uses the famous quote, property is theft. But Marx is motivated and inspired by how he distinguishes different types of property. And he basically says that there are possessions and there are property. And I think this is funny because this is when we get into the nuances, like many people that are against socialism, you know, they're like, the socialists are coming for your toothbrushes. Like socialists want all property to be communally owned. But that's a huge misconception and huge rhetoric to try to discredit socialism. Socialism fundamentally has differences between possessions and property. So you can keep your
this is to me is one of the things pop culture probably gets wrong the most, and but it's they don't get wrong naively, intentionally. They're trying to portray it as a government takeover of everything, and it's a difference. And he's saying here there's a clear difference between possessions and property. He's going to go into kind of talk about what he means here. So let's just wind it back maybe 45 seconds and then continue.
The most significant way to characterize the revolution. Okay, so let's sum that quote up and we can come up with basically two main tenets of Orthodox socialism. The first one is that the workers must have control over the workplace. The second one is private property will be abolished. I think the second one is where people have the biggest sort of misconceptions about socialism. So let's talk about private property and the concept of private property. Here, Marx specifically is highly influenced by Proudhon, which is an anarchist thinker, a French anarchist thinker about the same time period. And he writes a work in which he uses the famous quote, property is theft. But Marx is motivated and inspired by how he distinguishes different types of property. And he basically says that there are possessions and there are property. And I think this is funny because this is when we get into the nuances, like many people that are against socialism, you know, they're like, the socialists are coming for your toothbrushes. Like socialists want all property to be communally owned. But that's a huge misconception and huge rhetoric to try to discredit socialism. Socialism fundamentally has differences between possessions and property. So you can keep your toothbrushes, no one's coming for your toothbrush, but private property is a problem. You can equate private property with the means of production, like we talked about. These are the tools that are used to produce what people need to survive. So the socialists support the communal ownership of the means of production. In short, you can think of private property from the socialist lens as being anything that can be used to exploit someone else. So no matter how hard I try, I'm probably not going to be able to exploit you by stealing your toothbrush, like using your toothbrush.
Right. So, so if you think of private property as not how private property is defined today, and that's what's hard to get out, because how we've been conditioned, indoctrinated to believe what private property is what's hard to disconnect, to sort of understand maybe this concept, and that is that think of private property when you're talking property and possession, something that can be used to oppress you or exploit you. There's a better way, not oppress, exploit. So if I own a factory, that private ownership, I have the ability to exploit my workers. That is what the abolition of private property in Orthodox socialism is his interpretation, his reading of it. So, which I agree. So let's check in and see what she's said something. She has her, what is that thing called? Is it a hamster? What is the other one? Anyway, she's playing with a hamster. Anyway, so let's continue. It goes a little bit more here.
Toothbrush somehow. Like, that's not going to happen. But I can definitely own a company, or in Marx's time, own a factory and use that to exploit people. So if I have control of the means of production, then I can be exploitative. So that's what socialists mean when they say private property, the difference between property and possession. So keep that in mind. That's super important. Basically, when we're talking about Orthodox socialism, you can use this litmus test. It has to meet both of these requirements. The first is, does it talk about worker control over the means of production? And the second one is, does it involve the abolition of private property? And if it doesn't, then it's not Orthodox socialism. It might be something else. And this is an incredibly complex topic that we're boiling down to very simple ideas. It might be some other type of version of socialism, but it's definitely not Orthodox socialism. So keep that in mind. All right.
And so that's key. that's key to understanding is that Karl Marx in his work just set up the framework for socialism. So there's different expressions of that. You get what I'm saying? So it's like, what makes a house? A roof, four walls, but the all the inside of it can be different. But it could be same measurements. It can all look the same because the framework is the same. So that's how you have to kind of look at it, or how I look at it is a better way of saying it, because I don't want to suggest. Hang on, I'm reading some of the conversation in here. So, all productive property should be publicly owned, and this can only happen by the working class taking power and expropriating the capitalist assets. State-owned property can exploit you too. Absolutely. Labor to toil your life. But the concept is that if the people is running it, like the workers, like if the Amazon workers are running the Amazon warehouse, like they have control. The idea is that, or the concept is that workers are not going to oppress themselves, is the idea. In the same way that Congress doesn't vote for pay cuts for themselves. In the same way they don't vote for, you know what I mean? If you're the worker and you're also the person determining what's happening, you're unlikely to be doing things to oppress yourself. That's the concept. That's not. We're not talking about practice. I'm just literally just addressing the concept, not practice. Okay, so let's go back. There is a little more because he does have to talk about Lenin. He does have to, because Lenin is where where we begin to more use a separate understanding of the two words, socialism and communism. So let's continue.
All right, now super briefly, we're going to fly through the Marxist conception for how we get to socialism from capitalism. I also just want to use this time to remind you, if we're going too fast, you can always on YouTube slow down the video. So you can click in the settings and slow this down. Or if you really want to be aggressive, you can also speed it up.
So now we're going to go into, or he's going to go into the idea or part of the bullet points that I put up that we're going to address, which is the transition from capitalism to communism. So let's, or did he say socialism? But let's listen.
Beat it up. So here we go. How, according to Marx and Engels, do we get from capitalism to socialism? I'm going to read quotes. These are directly from the manifesto of the Communist Party. So they say, first, the first step is forming unions. The workers begin to form combinations, trade unions against the bourgeois. They club together in order to keep up the rate of wages. They found permanent associations in order to make provision beforehand for these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks out into riots. Now and then, the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit of their battles lies not in the immediate result, but in the ever-expanding union of the workers. Okay, step number one.
So let's stop there. Forming of unions. How do we get? Just understand it's all in the what we're discussing now is all in addressing how do we get to socialism from how do we get to socialism from capitalism according to Marx and Engels. Forming unions is sort of the first step. And it's forming unions not necessarily or not for the sole goal or the primary purpose to, get better labor conditions immediately, but the more important thing is that forming unions is what gets people to understand labor power, proletariat power. So he's going to go into it. Let's listen.
Or one form, unions, but not because the union itself is powerful and can get a raise every once in a while or an improvement in working conditions or so on, but because through the union, the proletariat begin to understand the collective power that they have as a class, which leads us to the next step, which is developing of a class consciousness. Quote, this organization of proletarians into a class and consequently into a political party is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves, but it ever rises up again stronger, firmer, mightier. So Marx and Engels argue that the workers basically are...
I'm going to go back to that there.
Form unions, but not because the union...
I wasn't fully engaged. My daughter, and Pixie is the name of her hamster, I guess is a hamster. Yeah, so let's continue.
In itself is powerful and can get a raise every once in a while or an improvement in working conditions or so on, but because through the union, the proletariat begin to understand the collective power that they have as a class, which leads us to the next step, which is developing of a class consciousness. Quote, this organization of proletarians into a class and consequently into a political party is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves, but it ever rises up again stronger, firmer, mightier. So Marx and Engels argue that the workers basically are convinced to compete among themselves, compete for jobs, compete for skills, compete based on different races and religions and political parties, and think of all of the ways that the common...
Actually, let me go back because I need to do this with trade unions because just remember I'm going to do this same sort of analysis with the next one. So I need to go back to do it with unions. So looking at this here, the workers began to form combinations, trade unions against the bourgeoisie. They clubbed together in order to keep up the rate of wages. That's what you're doing now. Do we see that as what Amazon is doing, for example? With John Deere, we see in all these labor actions to keep up the rate of wages. They find permanent associations in order. So he's saying this is what happens. You're going to find permanent associations. Hey, you think we should have Medicare for all? Hey, you think we should have whatever the conversation. Provision beforehand, occasional revolt. So here and there, the contest breaks out into riots, protests. Now and then, the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit, this is key to me. We have to understand minor concessions by capitalist class, a raise, better health care, that type of thing. That's not the finish line. So that's what they're saying here. So let's continue.
For these occasional revolts. Here and there, the contest breaks out into riots. Now and then, the workers are victorious, but only for a time. The real fruit of their battles lie.
Okay, so now I'm going to fast forward back to this here.
Is continually being upset again.
Which I want to also talk about. So develop class consciousness, overcoming manufactured divisions. This is so key. And this is what Nick talks about like all the time. That's what the video I played at the beginning of this stream sort of talks about and addresses. Developing class consciousness, overcoming manufactured divisions. Manufactured divisions. Rural whites and urban people of color thinking they're on opposite sides. That is a perfect expression or example of what is being said here. This organization of proletariats into a class and consequently into a political party. So imagine the proletariat understanding that they're proletariats and we're all proletariats and we're all in it together, rising above the differences and unifying under the banner of proletariats, right? But then developing that into a political party. And that political party, because it has all of the proletariats, it will dominate the political landscape. Anyway, I'm going a little bit further. So let's continue from there.
Again, by the competition between the workers themselves. But it ever rises up again, stronger, firmer, mightier. So Marx and Engels argue that the workers basically are convinced to compete among themselves, compete for jobs, compete for skills, compete based on different races and religions and political parties, and think of all of the ways that the common man, quote unquote, is divided. Nowadays, even in today's society, Marx and Engels argue that that's manufactured by the bourgeoisie to keep them divided so they will never realize that they're basically all in it together. And that once they make that realization that they're all proletariat first before anything else, that will lead to a successful revolution.
So this is where this comes from, where we're always talking about this on the left, at least in the spaces that I'm in, is realizing class consciousness, realizing, because this is the level where the propaganda, because developing class consciousness is hard when your brain is filled with propaganda, where you think as a person of color in an urban city that those rural whites over there are my enemy, or rural whites over there thinking, yeah, those urban people of color over there are my enemy, when you're actually on the same team. Is it possible to be on the same team and have some different ideas? Yes, that's possible. So this is the part about the left that doesn't feel like we're on the same page and executing. If we're trying to align, if we're aligning ourselves as Marxist Leninists or Marxist, even if we're not, the left, even if you're not that, the left kind of still takes its ideas from Marxism. From, even if you're not fully on board with the idea, it still kind of takes some of the concepts. But anyway, I'm going off on a tangent. Let's listen some more, and then I'll give some more explanation.
This is why many socialists are, I think, sort of negatively called class reductionists, because they believe that class consciousness is more important than anything else, and that once we realize we are all proletariat before we are black or white or Christian or Muslim, etc., once we realize that we are first and foremost proletariat and we have that in common, that we will begin to recognize our power in number.
Now, I always have a question here, because when the idea of, if we recognize that we're all proletariats above whether we're this and black and white, but at the time that was not what was included, was it? Like, are we rising above, we're proletariats, like, wasn't included in the thinking of we're all proletariats, LGBTQIA, black people of, it's just a lot of different groups. So I guess the question would always be, this is the part that, this is the hump that's very hard on the left for people to get over, is who to team up with, because that's what the question, that's what this really is about. When we say, forgetting all your divisions that is manufactured and coming together as all proletariats, that means you have one single thing in common that unites you. You're the working class. You're part of the proletariat. That's it. So you're going to have differences on everything from the death penalty to abortion to immigration. All of those things will be different. With this understanding, or with this sort of concept, and I'm not sure if the current American left is ready to do that. I'm not sure the current American left is ready to do that, partly or mainly because they've been propagandized to think that, you know, some sort of red-brown alliance or some other ridiculous sort of, yeah, just being ridiculous. Anyway, I think I put that one up. I'll put that up again. Let's check, do some chat check. So, yes. Okay, so let's see. Individualism is never BS. It's what makes us great: art, expression, diversity, and innovation. But would you have great art, expression, and and innovation if you weren't in community? Like a person in isolation, a person in jail, in the hole, just by himself, with your own thoughts, no one to speak to, no world to interact with. Could you develop? Would you have these expressions? Would you be able to do these other things? I guess the question would be just a matter of conversation. Not that I'm contesting, I'm just trying to interject a counterpoint. So America's working class needs more unions, more worker co-ops, maybe even federal job guarantees, power to the peaceful, and power to the people. Thank you for that comment. All right, so there is another video I'm going to be bringing up in just a second, but I think, actually, no, not just a second. I forgot. He still goes into Leninism, Stalinism, and Mao. He was going to go into.
No.
But just briefly, because they have to be talked about within the understanding of what socialism is, because they all kind of pushed the ball, had different. So let's do that. So let's talk about that now.
Marx himself doesn't actually use the term class consciousness. It's a future thinker that really solidifies this idea. And we can post a link in the description of this video to some of his work that really explains this really well. The next step, and this I think is probably the most surprising for the critics of socialism that don't really understand what socialism is to seize political power and to establish a true democracy. Quote, the movement will establish a democratic...
I bet some conservatives, because we do have a good amount of conservatives that watch our content. I wonder if you've heard of that before. Seize power, political power, and establish a true democracy, not what we have right now. I wonder if you ever knew that when understanding socialism.
A true democracy. Quote, the movement...
Oh, let me rewind a little more, sorry.
So on, but because through the union, the proletariat begin to understand the collective power that they have as a class, which leads us to the next step, which is developing of a class consciousness. Quote, this organization of proletarians into a class and consequently into a political party is continually being upset again by the competition between the workers themselves, but it ever rises up again stronger, firmer, mightier. So Marx and Engels argue that the workers basically are convinced to compete among themselves, compete for jobs, compete for skills, compete based on different races and religions and political parties, and think of all of the ways that the common man, quote unquote, is divided. Nowadays, even in today's society, Marx and Engels argue that that's manufactured by the bourgeoisie to keep them divided so they will never realize that they're basically all in it together. And that once they make that realization that they're all proletariat first before anything else, that will lead to a successful revolution. This is why many socialists are, I think, sort of negatively called class reductionists, because they believe that class consciousness is more important than anything else. And that once we realize we are all proletariat before we are black or white or Christian or Muslim, etc., once we realize that we are first and foremost proletariat and we have that in common, that we will begin to recognize our power in numbers. Marx himself doesn't actually use the term class consciousness. It's a future thinker that really solidifies this idea. And we can post a link in the description of this video to some of his work that really explains this really well. The next step, and this I think is probably the most surprising for the critics of socialism that don't really understand what socialism is to seize political power and to establish a true democracy. Quote, the movement will establish a democratic constitution, and through this, the direct or indirect dominance of the proletariat. Between capitalist and communist society, there lies the period of the revolutionary transformation of the one onto the other. Corresponding to this is also a political transition period in which the state can be nothing but the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat.
So let's reread this here, because this is also important. Seize political power and establish a true democracy. So socialism is the economic setup of, is the economic system, I guess you could say. Not guess you can say it, and then, but they still want a democracy. It's still democracy within it. So yeah, I don't need to further that point. The movement will establish a democratic constitution, and through this, the direct or indirect dominance of the proletariat. That means for the people, by the people, in my opinion. Between capitalist and communist societies, there lies the period of the revolutionary transformation of the one into the other. Corresponding to this is also a political transition period in which the state can be nothing but the revolutionary dictatorship of proletariat. So that's another part we said we're going to address this, which he talks about now, dictatorship of the proletariat.
Now, this is a super important term that Marx and Engels use, the dictatorship of the proletariat. The anarchists have a huge problem with this term. And if you want more on that, you can watch our video, What is Anarchism, that goes into, this is the main fundamental difference between socialism, let's say Marxist socialism, and anarchism. So keep that in mind, the dictatorship of the proletariat, because according to Orthodox Marxism, the first thing that will happen once the proletariat understand their power in numbers is they will seize control of the state, and they will use their majority, their numerical majority, to implement socialist policies. So they will.
I'm gonna pause it there. Like this comment, that's a better way of summing it up. I stumbled over my words, but socialism is democracy for the economy. That's it. There we go. So let's go here.
Will have a dictatorship. They will be able to control the state. Like I
so
said,
he's explaining what the dictatorship would be, because the numbers are so big, because we have all the workers now uniting, forming this party. He's gonna further explain it later in the video too.
Of the one onto the other. Corresponding to this is also a political transition period in which the state can be nothing but the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat. Now, this is a super important term that Marx and Engels use, the dictatorship of the proletariat. The anarchists have a huge problem with this term. And if you want more on that, you can watch our video, What is Anarchism, that goes into, this is the main fundamental difference between socialism, let's say Marxist socialism, and anarchism. So keep that in mind, the dictatorship of the proletariat, because according to Orthodox Marxism, the first thing that will happen once the proletariat understand their power in numbers is they will seize control of the state, and they will use their majority, their numerical majority, to implement socialist.
That's what we're talking about, implementing single-payer healthcare or nationalizing healthcare, nationalizing banks, like all these things that we on the left dream about, talk about. That's what he means by seizing control and implementing better conditions, essentially.
Policies. So they will have a dictatorship. They will be able to control the state. Like I said, anarchists have.
So maybe it sounds like the difference that anarchists have is that a literal dictatorship, or is an expression of, because of the power is so great in the proletariat, and the numbers, it's like it because they're doing just exactly what they want to do. There's no other way of stopping them. So I think he kind of goes into that in a little bit.
Have a problem with that? Check out our other video for information on that one. Then, of course, the next step after seizing control of the government, democratic control, is to implement socialist policies. So the proletariat will use the democratic system and use the fact that they are the numerical majority by far to implement policies that benefit themselves. This is actually nothing new. Going back to the ancient Greeks when they were talking about democracy, this was actually their critique of democracy too. And then going forward, future thinkers all tackled this topic when it comes to democracy, that if you let the majority actually have power in a democracy, they will use that power to benefit themselves. Marx and Engels agree, and they say this is a key part of the revolution. They will implement policies and they will change the society to abolish private property and to provide communal control of the means of production. Those are the two main, would be the two main next steps once the proletariat seizes political power. Now let's talk about the lower stages and higher stages of socialism. We're getting close to a point when these two terms, socialism and communism, are starting to mean two different things. Though we're still talking about Orthodox Marxism, we're still talking about Marx and Engels mainly and their ideas. But they do differentiate between lower and higher stages which then get built upon later on with future thinkers. So basically the idea is that the transition goes from full-blown capitalism to the lower stage of communism and then on to the higher stage of communism.
So that's because, again, they're using the same word instead of using capitalism to socialism to communism, because at the time the words were interchangeable and it was lower stage of capitalism and higher stage of capitalism was how it was referred to. So that's key to understanding, especially if you're talking to somebody who's trying to critique socialism to you. So yeah, let's continue.
The lower stage can be defined by basically you get out what you put in. It could be summed up by the quote, distribution according to actual labor time. Marx never actually said this, but you get the idea. This idea that from each according to their ability, to each according to what they contribute. Marx never said that, but you get the idea. The lower stage of communism is addressing the fact that you don't actually get out what you put in. So that's the lower stage, really put as simply as we can possibly put it. The higher stage, Marx actually does provide us an incredibly famous quote here that explains this. And it's from each according to their ability, to each according to their need. So no longer do you get out exactly what you put in, you now put in what you can and you get out what you need. This is when we begin to address the unequal distribution of goods and services. So the lower stage of communism begins to address the fact.
So let's talk about this in the higher stage when we're talking about Orthodox socialism. Where was that? From each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. And this concept is what is the sort of root to a lot of the pop culture critique, like it's unfair. So that's sort of they kind of take this and run with it. So let's continue.
Fact that you don't get paid, you don't have a right to your surplus labor. So it gives the people their surplus labor. The higher stage distributes that surplus labor fairly among the population. So these are two differences between the lower stage and the higher stage. I want to briefly mention this concept of vulgar socialism, because I think it's really common now in the modern discourse surrounding socialism, these debates.
Vulgar socialism, VULGAR, V as in Victor, right? I tried to look that up because I wanted to brings up this concept. I wanted to go to a short video, 30 seconds, minute video, to kind of interject what that is. Could not find a video on YouTube. Couldn't believe it until I said, no, we're in America. Then I said, no, I do believe it's not here.
Debates that we're having, almost always people are talking about vulgar socialism, which is handling the distribution of goods and services. I have to emphasize that Marx and Engels put their focus on first discussing the production and the inequality and exploitation that happens on the production side of the equation, not on the distribution side of the equation. And Marx very specifically says that if anyone tries to address the unfair distribution before addressing unfair production, this is what he calls vulgar socialism. And
and that's vulgar socialism. And he said this earlier, that it's almost always that's what people are talking about is vulgar socialism. And that's what capitalists mainly talk about as vulgar socialism. And it's trying to address the redistribution before you're addressing the exploitation. So that's what he's talking about here. That's what vulgar socialism, that's what he's saying it is.
Vehemently against this because he says this will never lead to an effective revolution, economic material revolution. This will never lead to a successful socialist society. That we must first prioritize the exploitation that takes place at the production level, the production side of the equation. But almost always, the rhetoric surrounding socialism nowadays, the debate in the media and politics and so on, has to do with distribution. This is a very intentional sleight of hand that is performed by the critics of socialism, because it's much easier to win the moral argument to convince people that distributing things evenly is unfair. It's morally wrong. They don't want to ever talk about the fact that exploitation is happening on the production side of things.
Right. They pretend as if socialism starts with the distribution. And they never talk about the critique that socialism has on the means of production or, the means of production. They never talk about that part of it. And that's the point. So if you're speaking to somebody, it's unfair if you're speaking to somebody who is not knowledgeable in this and they think they have a good talking point with that, you say, okay, we can address that, but let's address the first part of this, which is the exploitation part. So let's fix that, and then we'll get to this part. You get what I'm saying? Because they're saying this new system is a problem because of the redistribution without talking about the critiques of why we're even saying this system is better. So it's a sleight of hand is how he describes it here.
So just keep that in mind. And Marx was adamant that we must first give the workers a right to their surplus labor, that has to be the first step. And only then, in the higher stage, could we begin to discuss distributing products evenly. So that's vulgar socialism. Also important to note, in the higher stage of communism, the state ceases to exist, because the socialist conception of the state is that the state exists to basically referee class conflict, that there are inherent contradictions between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and the state is necessary to make sure that that conflict.
Right. So what is the state doing now but sort of refereeing conflict between the classes, because capitalism inherently creates these great, economic inequalities. And you call it crime, you call it gated communities, and so on. So yeah, I don't want to go into a tangent. Let's continue.
Does not completely destroy society. And following that logic, once there is no longer class conflict, the state will cease to exist. Again, the anarchists have a problem with this, but we'll talk about that. See that in our other video. Also, if you're curious more details about the socialist conception of the state, we also have a video titled "What is the State?" that goes into that. So check out that video as well. Now, surprisingly, and most people don't understand this, that's about it. We obviously oversimplified the Marxist conception of socialism, but Marx never provides a blueprint for what a future socialist society should look like. He gives us a little bit, and you read between the lines, but he never says, this is exactly my blueprint for the future. We have to understand that he very intentionally does that. He is a materialist.
Yeah, he's a materialist, so that's not something he's going to do. So it's not like something he forgot. having the ideology of being a materialist, goes against that ideology. So
he believes that only the people that go through the downfall of capitalism and the revolution and build the socialist society essentially from the ground up will have the ideas and be able to think in the ways that could possibly...
Meaning, like, if this is happening now, let's say this is happening now, because we know what's happening now, Marxist, there was no internet. They didn't know all of these other things to where they can say, okay, whenever this happens, this transition happens, this is how it should look like. And that's what he does not do.
Create this new society. It would go against his fundamental beliefs in historical materialism if he tried to think of those things. For Marx, that was impossible. The material world had to change first before people could think of the ways that a new society, a new world essentially could be structured. He's not a fortune teller. He doesn't say this is exactly what's going to happen. He basically says capitalism will fall because of these inherent contradictions, because the proletariat have very fundamental interests than the bourgeoisie, and because of that, capitalism will fall. And his analysis essentially stops there. He doesn't provide an outlook for the future and what future society will be like, because that would go against the fundamental beliefs of historical materialism and other Marxist ideas.
Okay, and now we're about to go into Lenin. It's very brief, the Lenin part, and Stalin is even more brief than that. So, and then we'll wrap this up in just a little bit.
Most people are really surprised to hear that Marx didn't lay this blueprint out. In fact, many of my students are surprised when they read the manifesto for class and they come in like, well, I didn't read anything about breadlines here or gulags or famines or, well, very clearly Marx and Engels didn't write any of those things. They didn't say, well, we're going to have a socialist revolution, then there will be a massive famine, and then we will need these camps, these labor camps. Like that obviously clearly was not in the conception of socialism by Marx and Engels. They weren't fortune tellers. They merely suggested that capitalism will fall due to inherent contradictions, and socialism, a different world, will exist after that. And it's up to the people that go through the actual physical revolution to make those changes. Now, one of the biggest critiques is timeline. Marx and Engels, Marx at least specifically, did believe that revolution would happen in his lifetime, which it very clearly didn't. But that's really the basic fundamental critique. They never provided sort of a future blueprint for what society would be like. All right, this leads us now to Lenin, Stalin, and Mao. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I'm definitely going to oversimplify these three men and their actions and their ideas. I just want to give a very basic understanding of how their ideas and what...
So here's the graphic here, the simplified evolution of socialist ideology. We have Marx and Engels here. 1818, he's born 1883. And then you have Lenin, who is 13 when Marx dies. Is that right? Yes, 13. So Lenin, and then from there, Lenin, Stalin, Mao. Okay, so there we go. So let's continue.
What they implemented differ than traditional Marxism, and maybe some of the reasoning behind why that differed a little bit. So let's start with Lenin. And we have to understand that Lenin and Leninism are obviously two different things. One's the man and one are his ideas. But even then, Leninism doesn't really become an ism until Stalin takes power and starts to codify some of Lenin's ideas. Lenin is an incredible philosopher and writer in his own right, but his ideas don't become sort of this, I hate to use your term dogma because it's this pejorative term used to describe socialists often, but it doesn't become sort of something that you follow until Stalin starts to really put it together and solidify it. So Lenin and Leninism, and Lenin's actions and Leninism are sometimes two different things. So let's understand that right off the bat. Lenin is the one that first begins to talk about socialism and communism being two different things. And then Stalin takes and builds upon that even more.
So that's what I think I mentioned this earlier, or maybe he mentioned it earlier. So Lenin is where the concept of the interchangeable use of socialism and communism stops. Because they kind of go lower, they have the lower communism, higher communism, which then develops into socialism and communism, right? So let's continue here.
And more. So for Lenin, socialism was defined by being the dictatorship of the proletariat, this period of time when the proletariat had control over government and the state and used that to implement socialist policies. Then communism becomes known as the higher stage that Marx and Engels described, when the state would wither away and so on, and we would have a totally egalitarian society. Now, we have to understand very clearly we have never had a communist society using this terminology in the history of the world other than primitive communism, perhaps like Marx described. But in advanced modern society, we have never gone through a revolution from capitalism to the higher stage, the final stage, which is communism. We have to understand that it's never happened. So when people use, say, like China is communist, A, they're not even really socialist, according to Orthodox socialism, but they definitely are not communist. They have not reached this higher stage. They don't have full equality. The state very clearly has not withered away, and so on.
But this is what capitalists in the United States, or just capitalists in general, want to paint the picture. Like, look at China, they're communist. Look what's happening over there. It's like, they're clearly not communists. They're clearly not communists by the true definition of the word. And then he says here that they're not even really socialists. So, and there never has been a communist country that has existed. So let's continue.
Go on. So either this term is used out of ignorance or it's used intentionally to denigrate whatever is being discussed. I tend toward people use it mostly for the latter. They use China to be communism to describe China because communism is this big scary word. And in fact, the Red Scare, we were scared of communist countries and so on, which is nonsense because no country has ever been communist. And now that you know the difference between the two, you can determine between socialist countries and communist countries and understand the difference. Some countries have made it into some version of socialism, but no country has ever made it all the way through socialism into communism. That has never happened. So understand the difference nowadays with the modern usage of those terms, starting with Lenin and into Stalin, that no society has ever been communistic. That has never happened. So just keep that in mind. One of the biggest things in fact, this is like a landmark difference between Orthodox Marxism and Leninism, is this concept of the revolutionary vanguard. The revolutionary vanguard was this concept by Lenin of basically professional revolutionaries. And the idea was the common worker did not have the time to be studying Marxist theory in depth and to be involved in revolution 24 hours a day and so on. So he came up with this concept of the revolutionary vanguard. The revolutionary vanguard were basically professional revolutionaries. They did have time to study theory and become incredibly well-versed. And they did have time. They were paid by the party. They could be paid by the party. They had time to leave their traditional jobs, whatever that might have been, and to lead the revolution, to be the leaders of this movement, and that was their professional job. So this concept of the revolutionary vanguard. This is a huge debate point between Orthodox Marxists and Leninists about whether or not this class of people should exist. The Orthodox Marxists, most of them believe the revolutionary vanguard was not only unnecessary, but also could be oppressive. They're basically dictating the terms of the revolution to the rest of the working class instead of it coming basically from the bottom up. So that's one critique. That's one point of contention between Orthodox Marxists and Leninists, is this concept of the revolutionary vanguard. Lenin was incredibly anti-imperialist, which most people I think don't know for some reason unless they've studied this in depth. And this is one of the things that Lenin takes from Marx's, takes and builds upon. He adds this to sort of the Marxist discourse, because imperialism as we know it in modern advanced industrial society,
he kind of goes off on something else on this point here. So I'm going to pause it here. We're going to come back, but I'm going to pause it here because there is another video I want to make sure I get to before we end here. It kind of talks about, now I was researching this, and I'm always trying to research basic explanations of things. So it's in its basic form when doing these sort of educational videos. And I came across one from the Jimmy Dore show. Now, last week was Jimmy Dore week. This week, or actually, it was supposed to be a week, but now it's going to turn into a couple of weeks. This was supposed to be revolution or I am revolutionary. I am the revolution week, but it just so happens that Richard Wolff was on Jimmy Dore this episode, so I didn't search out this episode. But Richard Wolff happened to be on the episode where he's talking about Marxist theory, and it's on Jimmy Dore. So that's the reason why I'm going to show you this video here. And this, I guess, he gives a more. He tries to give a more real world layman's explanation of it. All right, I gotta finish this up soon because she's getting restless here. Okay, so let's go here and go in to where he explains it here. Let's see if it's in the beginning. I didn't write the time code down for this. This one was thrown in late last night, so I didn't get a chance to read it. So let's get started.
He's a friend of the show. You've seen him on the show before. It's Dr. Richard Wolff, and he is a Marxian economist, best known for his work on Marxian economics, economic methodology, and class analysis. He's a professor emeritus at UMass Amherst, and he's a host of a weekly radio show on Pacifica, Economic Update, which is also on YouTube. Please welcome back to the show, Richard Wolff. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, please, for a dumb guy like me, please explain what that means, Marxian economics.
Okay, good. I'm glad you asked. You know, after World War II, America changed, and you really have to go back to make sense of this. During World War II, and I'm always amazed at how many Americans don't know this, we were allied with the Soviet Union. If you went into a post office in the United States to pick up a few stamps in the 1940s, you would see a picture of Uncle Sam hand in hand with Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe was Joseph Stalin because he was the great ally in the fight against Germany and Japan, the fascists, et cetera, et cetera. So Americans had gotten used to.
So everybody, my daughter's getting real restless, so I'm gonna let her say hi, and then you're gonna go back to play. Okay, come on. You can see yourself on screen here. Okay, you can see you see yourself right there. Okay, let me make you bigger here. And then you're gonna go play. I'm gonna finish up. Okay, so say hi to everybody.
Hi, everybody.
Say hi.
Hi.
Okay, you see yourself there? Okay, and you can talk into the mic.
Hello. Hello.
Okay. All right, baby.
Ow.
I'm gonna finish up. What is all this? Well, you have to clean that up. Okay, so let's now get back. So she walked up and was standing right here and I was trying to listen to this video. So I'm like, let me address her, and then I'm able to move forward here. So now I'm able to move forward. Let's go here. Gotta find the right tab. I have so many tabs open. Here it goes.
Our buddies, the communists in Russia. Then at the end of the war, everything changed, and everybody had to learn to hate and fear what before had been the big allies. That was a trauma. That's hard on any population. And Americans got real scared that somehow the war that they had just fought to make us safe hadn't done it. We were now in danger, nuclear weapons and all of that. So what happened in the United States was that anything that had anything to do with Russia or Soviet Union or communism was considered so bad, so toxic, so scary that you wouldn't go near it. And since the Russians kept referring to themselves as followers of Karl Marx.
So let me rewind this story that he's telling, because this is a history lesson. A lot of people don't know this, but Russia used to be our ally in the fight against Nazis.
It's hard on any population. And Americans got real scared that somehow the war that they had just fought to make us safe
Okay, so he goes back a little more.
Means Marxian economics.
So let's listen.
Okay, good.
And I'll stop at the point I want.
You know, after World War II, America changed, and you really have to go back to make sense of this. During World War II, and I'm always amazed at how many Americans don't know this, we were allied with the Soviet Union. If you went into a post office in the United States to pick up a few stamps in the 1940s, you would see a picture of Uncle Sam hand in hand with Uncle Joe. And Uncle Joe was Joseph Stalin because...
Can you believe that? Can you imagine Uncle Sam hand in hand with a picture of Joseph Stalin? Can you, I mean, I can't even envision that today. The legacy of U.S. anti-capitalist indoctrination is evident in this chat. Yes. And that is why I haven't put up a lot of stuff on the screen, sir. But that's what these videos that I'm hoping to do will sort of deprogram, re-educate people past the propaganda that they've been indoctrinated for a lifetime. You know, an 1 hour stream is not going to change a lifetime of indoctrination. So it's a over time, constant conversations. That's what's needed. But let's try to finish this up so we can get up, so I can get up out of here, get to my daughter. She's tearing up the house over there.
Because he was the great ally in the fight against Germany and Japan, the fascists, et cetera, et cetera. So Americans had gotten used to our buddies, the communists in Russia. Then at the end of the war, everything changed, and everybody had to learn to hate and fear what before had been the big allies. That was a trauma. That's hard on any population. And Americans got real scared that somehow the war that they had just fought to make us safe hadn't done it. We were now in danger, nuclear weapons and all of that. So what happened in the United States was that anything that had anything to do with Russia or Soviet Union or communism was considered so bad, so toxic, so scary that you wouldn't go near it. And since the Russians kept referring to themselves as followers of Karl Marx, this stuff applied to Marxism. And you weren't supposed to get the book out of the library, and you weren't supposed to read it. Let me give you an example. How
do you think that? Is it Americans or is it capitalists who are Americans, who are the ones who starting this march against communism? Because again, we were allied with Russia in the 1940s. Allied. But as they begin, and he's saying, as they still kind of referring to Karl Marx, a person who has some of the best written criticism of capitalism, we can't have that. Because we can't have our people hearing this capitalist stuff, this communism stuff from an ally. So we have to make them an enemy. So let's continue.
I have a PhD in economics. Nobody ever asked me as part of my curriculum to get that PhD to read one word of Karl Marx, who was, after all, whatever else you think of him, the biggest and greatest critic of capitalism ever. So we have a generation, my generation, that doesn't know the most important criticism of our economic system that exists. So all it means when you call me a Marxist is I went against the grain. I said, I'm going to read this.
Capitalists don't want workers to know that the biggest critique is that they're being exploited. So it's not the biggest critique is something else, but the biggest critique is speaking to the workers that is making these capitalists money. Now you see the fear that communism puts into capitalists, why it's a constant smearing of capitalism because people can't know what it's really about. I'm sorry, smearing of communism because people can't know what it's really about. And by way of communism, also socialism too. And let's see if this finishes up here.
This stuff. If there's nothing in there, okay, I will have learned not to pay much more attention. I went, I read it, and guess what? I discovered there's lots of interesting ideas there. The way I like to explain it to people is simple. If you wanted to understand a family lived up the street, and you knew they had a father, mother, 2 kids, and you knew one kid loved the family, thought they were lucky to be born into that family, and the other one thought it was a psychological basket case. If you were going to write a story analyzing that family, would you talk to one kid, either one, and not the other one? Makes no sense. You talk to them both, you hear what they have to say, then you draw your own conclusions. We live in a...
That's the part that capitalists don't want you to draw your own conclusion or critically think. Which shows that they understand how terrible capitalism is. Because if you're that great, just put all your greatness up against all this terrible system that you say is terrible. It's because capitalists understand they know they're not. Capitalists have read the Communist Manifesto is the second most read book in human history behind the Bible. They've read it. They studied it, and they've studied it in order to make sure it doesn't happen in this country. So let's continue a little bit more here.
In a country that was so scared of our enemy, who had been our friend before, that we refused to look at it. It's a little bit like a child scared of a dog, puts his or her hands in front of their eyes and imagines a dog goes away. The dog doesn't go away. Marxian theory, Marxian economics, is a criticism of capitalism. It makes a whole lot of arguments about why capitalism ain't so good and we could do better. Given the situation of the world today, seems to me a reasonable thing to at least read this stuff, and that's all I ever did as I read it.
And so what is Marx, what are some of his prescriptions to fix capitalism that we could implement?
Well, his point of view is a little different. His point of view is, we've tried to fix it. We've tried over and over to fix it. We've had all good efforts to fix it. You can't fix it. It's busted. It's a little bit, for Marxian economics, is a little bit like having that meeting with the refrigerator repairman comes to your house. He's been to your house now more and more frequently. This time it's the condenser, next time it's the motor, next time it's the this. And then there comes that sad moment when he comes to you and he says, look, I could take another couple of $100 and fix it, but you're throwing money away. It's time to get a new refrigerator.
That's essentially what left is like what we're saying, especially with your voting power, throwing it away with the Democrat or Republican. Because what you do know, if you vote for them, they're not going to do the things that you want to have happen because they're telling you up front they don't want those things. Democrats aren't saying they want nationalized healthcare. They aren't saying they want to end qualified immunity. They're not saying they want to defund the police. They're saying the quite opposite. They're not saying they want to cut the military budget. So guess what? If you vote for them, you know for sure you're not getting that. So yeah. But let's continue.
And you don't want to hear it, but you kind of know, since he's a straight guy, that he's giving it to you honestly, and you might as well save the $200. Marx's argument is you need a different system. You can't. We've tried, for example, to have less inequality in our world. We have more than we've ever had. We have inequality now that takes you back to ancient Egypt.
Right.
You know, Jeff Bezos has $129 billion. I mean, it's obscene, basically.
Right.
You have millions of people can't pay their kids college, can't do the most basic things a society wants to do. And so Marx would say, hey, this system produces inequality. It always has. And it keeps doing that until people rise up and say, we've had it. And then it stops for a while, and then it starts up again. So you kind of ought to learn the lesson. The system's busted. Let's try something else.
And what do you say we should try?
Marx's argument's very elementary in this area because he didn't spend a lot of time. He didn't believe in looking into the future and guessing how things would. He didn't believe in that. He made a joke once. If you want that, go to the county fair, give money to the lady who tells you your future. It's fun. It's amusing.
I saw the comment where somebody said people in the chat have Jimmy derangement syndrome. Like it's derangement syndrome if, and I've defined this before, Richard Wolff has been on the screen and speaking like 95% of this video. So if you're bringing up Jimmy Dore as a critique in any way, to me, that's the definition of Jimmy Dore syndrome. Because literally, we're talking about something else. I mentioned in the beginning that I simply am using this because this is where I found Richard Wolff explaining Marxism was on a Jimmy Dore video. Jimmy is literally has talked for less than a minute if you combine it together. So that's what I mean by it. And I saw somebody say it and I was just laughing that somebody else kind of picked up on that. It's like, come on. So let's get back to the topic here.
Amusing, but you don't take that seriously. She doesn't really know what's going to happen to you next month. So he didn't do much. So you have to kind of read between the lines and tease it out. And this is what it would look like. His argument is we have an economic system, this capitalist system, that puts a very small number of us in the driver's seat. If you look at the percentage of people who own shares of stock in America, you get a very quick understanding. 1% of shareholders own 2/3 of all the stock.
Okay, so I think he doesn't have to go into the example. I think sort of like the real world application of concepts, he's kind of already made that point. So then let's just go to back to the original video to finish this out and let him finish speaking about Lenin. And then we're going to close out there. We'll have to pick up Stalin and Mao when we're talking about communism. I'll make sure to include their segment there. Again, it's very brief. It's not like it's long, but my daughter is super restless right now. I need to get off pretty soon here.
Didn't really exist in Marx's time, but it definitely existed in Lenin's time. So he adds a lot of context to the relationship between capitalism and imperialism. And he has a lot of really important work on this. And he, in fact, claims that imperialism is the highest form of capitalism, basically going somewhere else and exploiting their economic resources, that is not something different from capitalism, that is capitalism in its highest peak. And interestingly, true to his word, Lenin abandons almost all.
So that's what I was about to say. For those who just joined us, I'm going back to this video, which is the original video we was talking about before I went to the Richard Wolff video. But he's speaking about Lenin briefly in a discussion about socialism. So that's where we're at here. Let's see.
All of the Russian colonial and imperial.
Let me go back again. There we go.
They could be paid by the party. They had time to leave their traditional jobs, whatever that might have been, and lead the revolution.
That was way too far back. There we go.
Russian imperial interests, basically in Iran, they pull out of that. It's interesting to think about. So he stays true to his word. He's anti-imperialist because it very clearly doesn't fit with socialist doctrine. And so he abandons all imperial projects. Another point of contention between the traditional socialists and the Leninists is the idea of the socialist state. So some Orthodox Marxists argue that even though they used the term dictatorship of the proletariat, that they actually used this in sort of a benign way, and it wasn't meant to be authoritarian at all. And then they would argue, this group of Orthodox Marxists would argue that Lenin, the state that Lenin implements, is far more authoritarian than what Marx would have decided. But this is a point of debate. Many people argue that this is exactly what Marx was talking about.
So this is a disagreement between Orthodox Marxists or people and Leninists. I feel like what Lenin implemented was a little more authoritative than Marx would have liked. But these are just interpretations of these two sides.
Was talking about when he talked about the dictatorship of the proletariat. But just understand that that's a point of contention between Leninists and Orthodox Marxists. What Marx actually meant when he talked about the dictatorship of the proletariat, the critiques of Leninism argue that Lenin's version of the state was more authoritarian than Marx would have originally wanted, or what he saw was going to be the future. Okay, on to Stalin.
All right, so we're going to end it there and pick up Stalin. I'm not sure we're going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to talk to Nick about what does he want to cover next. I have a list of things, and then I'll just let him select. If he's coming tomorrow or the next day, we'll see which one he wants to speak on. But I do want to go back to our Twitter so that I guess I'm getting off right now, babe. Okay, and then we can do something. And you didn't hurt Pixie, right? Okay, good. All right, so let's go here. This is getting close, so I want to make sure I give the opportunity to shout this out every time. We have the International Anti-Imperialist Summit that's coming up April 29th through May 1st. And it's going to be a great summit. The difference with this summit is we're going to have international academics, activists, and people on the ground. So from the global south, from Europe, from Asia. So different activists will be participating across the world in this summit. So make sure you save the date, check that out. It's going to be a great ordeal. Sweetheart, get down before you fall. There you go. Oh, here was what I was going to say here. So, what was I looking for? Oh, the other thing I was looking for. That's what okay. So I'm looking for our. Oh, I was supposed to do. So I will be doing a fundraiser. This is something I forgot. We'll be doing a fundraiser. So my mom's house, she owes taxes, behind in taxes, and the family's trying to raise money. So I'm going to be doing a fundraiser to raise money for her taxes. It's a couple $1,000 that she needs to pay in an installment. So that is something I think I might do that. It'll be quick, like a 30-minute stream. I'm not sure when, but I will be doing that. Maybe one this week and one next week to help crowdfund for that. Also, this is the one I was looking for. So just like every episode, or not every, or just about every episode, I want to try to end and begin with some sort of educational video or some video historical information. And this is the video. This is Bobby Seale. It'll be self-explanatory. Come over here, sweetheart. Let's say goodbye. And she's here waiting for me. Oopsie. I want you to sit on this side because the mic is on the other side. Okay. So we're going to be signing off. Let me slide this over here. Okay. So you can tell everybody bye-bye. And love the show. Thank you. Like the knowledge. Like I was saying before the stream, let's make sure we are as attentive engaged into content that is educational like this. is the same sort of interest as we do in the controversial stuff, the he said, she said, the leftist discourse, the Sam Cedar type of stuff. Why you keep looking at me? Am I saying something weird? Huh? So yeah. So what we have coming up is, what is feudalism? Not in this order. What is capitalism? What is communism? What is revolution? Black radical tradition. That's going to be a couple of episodes just to do that. So yeah. Let's sign off. I'm going to let you see yourself on the big screen, okay? There you go. So you can tell. If you look here, that'll make it look like you're looking right at him, okay?
Okay.
Say bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And you can tell people your name. What's your name?
What's your name?
No, what is your name?
What's your name?
Well, tell everybody your name.
What's your name?
Oh, okay. She has jokes. All right, so I'm going to be signing off here. Thanks for joining me today for this stream. And I will see you tomorrow for more education, more I Am the Revolution. Thank you for joining me. I'm signing off. Actually, I'm not going to sign off from there, but I do want you to see that's the logo, or that's right now what the show's logo is. And today we cover what is socialism, more of Orthodox socialism. There's different forms. There's no way I can answer all different types of socialism. So that's why I'm covering more of the Orthodox concepts of it. Okay, because there's many different interpretations of how socialism is expressed. So here we go. This is, I said Bobby Seale. This is Huey Newton. I think I said Bobby Seale earlier. But this is Huey Newton if I said Bobby Seale earlier. So we are signing off. See everybody tomorrow.
not for our security, but the security of the business owners in the community, and also to see that the status quo is kept intact.